Hello everyone, welcome back. This is the final episode of my A6M2 project. In the previous episodes I showed all the extra details that I had added to my Zero. 3D printed cockpit, engine, tailwheel, gun base, landing flaps and folding wingtips. The base kit was an Eduard Profipack edition in 1:48 scale. The kit is absolutely fantastic and basically no need any upgrade set to build a magnificent model. Before the build, stop for a second and check this wonderful box art. The artist behind this fantastic artwork is Piotr Forkashevich. I love it, it's absolutely a true masterpiece. As usual, I started the build with the cockpit. There is a dedicated video for the cockpit build on my channel where I show how I build and compare the kit cockpit and the 3D printed cockpit. If you are interested in watching it, please click the link on the screen or in the description below. I use the 3D printed cockpit for my Zero, but I will probably use the already built kit cockpit in one of my future builds. My favorite parts of the build were the guns and the gun sight. I decorated the back of the guns with Japanese kanji characters. It was fun to paint them with a fine brush. My other favorite part was the gun sight. The upgrade set provides transparent film and PE part for the gun sight. Lovely little details. After the cockpit I built the engine. Again I built and compared the kit engine and the 3D engine. Well, the quality was second to none. Both engines are excellent. With a bit of extra work the kit engine can be upgraded, but I used the 3D printed engine in my Zero. I put aside the finalized engine and started to work on the fuselage. I had to cut and modify the fuselage and the wings to make room for the upgrade sets. For this surgery I used a razor saw, different scribers and a mini drill. To clean the part I used various files, sanding sticks and sanding sponges. For gluing the parts I used Tamiya extra thin cement and superglue. Throughout this video, whenever I do something related to a previous video, there will be a link to it in the top right corner if you would like to check it out. I'd like to tell you the history of this aircraft because it's quite an interesting story. On the 7th of December in 1941, 350 aircraft, including 79 A6M Zeros, took off from 6 aircraft carriers towards Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The US Navy lost 5 battleships in this attack. 200 American aircraft were destroyed. It was a tragic day for the US Navy, but a glorious day for the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Zero. The Japanese Navy officially adopted the Zero in July 1940. It was a bit more than a year before the Pearl Harbor attack. Despite achieving great success in China, the A6M Zero had no reputation in the US or Europe. West believed that the Japanese couldn't develop a fighter with such performance. The Pearl Harbor attack showed that Japanese aircraft designers created something that the West should take seriously. Let's go back 3 years in time. In October 1937, the Mitsubishi's Nagoya Aircraft Factory had just received design specification for a new Navy fighter. The man behind the project was Horikoshi Jiro, the lead designer at Nagoya Aircraft Manufacturing. The requirements for the Imperial Japanese Navy's 12th experimental carrier fighter were incredible. Horikoshi said, "If we create this, it will without a doubt be the best fighter in the world. But it's impossible, it cannot be done." This 12th prototype carrier fighter would later become the Type Zero carrier fighter. This is where the Zero story begins. Horikoshi was skeptical for a reason. Just a few years ago, Japanese fighters were all created from Western designs. The reality was that Japan had no experience with aircraft design. All previous designs were created purely by foreign designers. After World War I, Japan appeared as a new power in Asia and Western nations became worried. The maximum size of Japan's naval fleet was restricted in the 1921 Washington Naval Treaty. During the 1930 London Naval Treaty, the number of destroyer escorts was again limited. Western countries tried to keep Japan's military power under control. Due to these restrictions, Japan had no choice but to rely on carriers to expand its naval power. The Imperial Japanese Navy implemented the Aviation Technology Self-Reliance Plan in 1932 to develop independent Japanese aircraft designs. The Navy created the Navy Aviation Bureau, which would later become the Navy Technology Bureau. The goal was to develop Japan's own aircraft technology without relying on foreign, especially US-designed bureaus' assistance to catch up and exceed world standards in military aviation. After I glued the cockpit into the port side of the fuselage, I made the throttle control rods from Albion alloy 0.3mm nickel silver tubes. Easy details, and they are still visible after the fuselage halves are glued together. The first step in this long journey led to the Zero was the Prototype 7 project. It was the first purely Japanese aircraft design with a top speed requirement of 370 km per hour at 3000 meters altitude. This plane had to be 100 km per hour faster than its predecessor, the Type 90. It also had to climb 2 minutes faster to 3000 meters. Prototype 7 was completed in February 1933. Unfortunately, both the first and the second prototypes crashed during test flights. Horikoshi's first design was a complete failure, but its modern monoplane low-wing design and all-metal structure were to become the basis of the upcoming A5M Claude and A6M0. Nakajima also entered the Prototype 7 project, but their design could have been more successful too. It shows how hard it was to create a capable carrier fighter with only Japanese designers. The next milestone was Prototype 9. The design name no longer included carrier fighter, it was a simple single-seat fighter. Speed and range were two essential factors in this design. During World War II, the three key factors for a capable fighter design were speed, armament, and maneuverability. But it was a great challenge to keep all these three in balance. Horikoshi's biggest struggle was the choice of the engine. Horikoshi decided on the rival company Nakajima's Kotobuki engine. The Prototype 9 fighter, later A5M, adopted multiple modern features besides the engine. The design used an all-metal construction from duralumin, which was just announced and was much more sturdier than standard aluminum. Duralumin structure is more resistant to twist or flutter. This became known as a monocoque design, and the fuselage was built in the similar way. The problem with aluminum is that it cannot be welded. It has to be riveted. I placed the control surfaces in an offset position. At the elevator, the lightning holes are visible. I drilled those holes with thin PCB 0.3 and 0.5mm drill bits. The Prototype 9's wing design had an unusual element. To prevent wingtip stalls, the wing implemented a washout design, the first in the world. Aircraft don't only stall at low speed, but they can also stall at high speed if the angle of attack is steep enough. In the wingtip stall, the ailerons become useless, the plane loses balance and become uncontrollable, which can lead to fatal accidents. Horikoshi used the washout wing design. Washout design is commonly achieved by designing the wing with a slight twist, reducing the angle of incidence from root to tip and therefore causing a lower angle of attack at the wingtips than at the wing roots. This feature is sometimes referred as a structural washout. The Japanese designers did everything possible to get the best aerodynamic performance from the airframe to compensate for the weak engine. Handbars and footbars are on the left side of the fuselage for entering and exiting the aircraft. To avoid stepping on the thin surface of the flaps, there are 3 footbars and 2 handbars in total. I really like these little bars, so I made them from alloy tubes and thin styrene rods. I drilled the holes for the handbars and carved the cavities for the footbars. After the paint job, I installed the bars. These are really easy little details, but they look pretty good. In February 1935, Mitsubishi tested the speed of their Prototype 9. At 3200 meters, the plane achieved a top speed of 450 km per hour. It had exceeded the Navy requirements by over 100 km per hour. To the top of it, the plane reached 5000 meters in 5 minutes and 54 seconds. It was an outstanding climb rate. Horikoshi's second design had managed to exceed world standards. The Prototype 9 changed its name when it was officially adopted in 1936. It was renamed the Type 96 after the 2596th anniversary of the Emperor's reign. The Type 96 A5M achieved great success from its introduction. Before painting, I cleaned the surface with isopropyl alcohol and then I prepared the surface with Mr. Surfacer 1200 primer. The primer is a solid base for the paint and revealed the imperfections that I had to fix. At this point, I just realized that I glued the ailerons wrong. I placed the control stick in the cockpit in the off-right position and I glued the ailerons the other way. This was aileron installation take 2. There will be one more, but that's for later. In September 1937, Horikoshi's team had just settled down after developing multiple modifications for the A5M. That was when the Navy published its specification requirements for the new fighter. The listed specifications were shocking. The plane had to overmaneuver all contemporary fighters and have the armament and speed to intercept any enemy attacks. The Navy had 13 key requirements in total. After I fixed all the problems, I applied a light layer of Tamiya XF76 grey-green. Then I used my favorite pre-shading technique, the white marble patching. With highly diluted white paint, mixed with a drop of retarder, I painted random patches between the panel lines and the rivet lines. For this delicate job I used my trusty Sparmax SP20X 0.2mm airbrush. It's a very good quality airbrush and it doesn't cost that much. The white marbling was quite time-consuming, but it was worth it because I liked the result. And here are the 13 key requirements from the Navy. Superior dogfight ability against enemy fighters and ability to intercept enemy bombers. Speed over 500 km per hour at 4,000 meters. Climb rate 3.5 minutes to 3,000 meters. The range must be 1.5 hours at normal loading at 3,000 meters or over 6 hours at cruising speed. The new aircraft should take off from 70 meters at the wind speed of 12 meters per sec. The takeoff speed should slower than 107 kilometers per hour. The dive rate is 3.5 or 4 meters per sec. Dogfight ability equal or superior to the A5M. Armaments needs to be 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.7mm machine guns. Bomb load 260 or 230 kg bombs. Radio, 1 set complete radio equipment and a radio direction finder. Other equipment such as an oxygen set, fire extinguisher, night lighting and standard instruments are needed. The strength of the aircraft must be 7G during and after dive pull out, 2G at maximum speed and 3.5G inverted. This specification requirement list was quite unrealistic, that's why Horikoshi said it's impossible. Speed and maneuverability contradict each other. If designers focus on speed, they will lose maneuverability. A plane that could meet all the requirements seemed utterly impossible. While I build a model, I constantly read and collect information about the history of the aircraft. After April 1941, from the 127th aircraft, the ailerons were redesigned because of a double accident. The aircraft that I built was manufactured in October, so it must have been installed with the new ailerons. So the ailerons were wrong again. I took them off, glued the right ones and fixed the pre-shading. About 30 people were in the Prototype 12 design team. The average age was only 20. The top of it, only 3 of them had engineering degrees. Horikoshi, who was 34, was the lead designer. Son Yoshitoshi, calculator, was a structural designer and he was only 27. And Tojo Teruo, calculator, who was only 23, had engineering degrees. The rest of the team members were graduates from technical schools or middle schools. Horikoshi's team did an excellent job. The team created over 3,000 sheets of blueprints. After the white paint, I highlighted the panel lines with a mixture of Tamiya grey-green and flat red. I mixed a light salmon color, something like the real primer used at the Mitsubishi factory back in 1941. I used this mixture lighter over the rivet lines. After the pre-shading, I applied multiple thin layers of Tamiya XF76 grey-green. I like to build the desired color tone layer by layer. In this way, I have more control over the transparency of the top layer. I painted the control surfaces a bit whiter. I mixed a touch of white into the grey-green. To meet the requirements, Horikoshi's team focused on 4 aspects of the design: the engine choice, the propeller choice, weight reduction, and aerodynamics. Although the A5M was a Mitsubishi design, it used its rivals Nakajima's 600 horsepower Kotobuki engine. For this new fighter, Horikoshi wanted to use a Mitsubishi engine. Mitsubishi was striving to catch up to Nakajima in engine design. Thus, the high-performance Kinsei 46 and Suisei 13 engines were built. The Kinsei 46 was a bit stronger, though bigger and heavier. It was a little bit more than 1.2 meter in diameter and 560 kilograms in weight. It produced 1070 horsepower. The Suisei 13 was a bit lighter and smaller with its 1.1 meter diameter and 526 kilograms, but its performance was only 875 horsepower. Horikoshi wanted to keep the airframe size down as much as possible, so the smaller 14-cylinder Suisei 13 engine was chosen. The first prototype flown on the 1st of April 1939 above Gifu Prefecture in Japan. The Zero managed 490 km per hour at 3,800 meters altitude, although it didn't reach the required 500 km top speed, but it was still quite an achievement. The next day it was revealed that the pitot tube measuring the speed was inaccurate, so the plane was flying over 500 km per hour. On the 14th of September 1939, Captain Maki delivered the first prototype to the Yokosuka Navy base. 2 prototypes were built and tested by the Navy Aviation Bureau. These 2 aircraft used the Mitsubishi Suisei engine. However, the Aviation Bureau sent an unexpected request. They ordered the design team to replace the engine with the Nakajima Sake 12 radial engine. Although the Sake engine had extra 75 horsepower, the designers weren't happy to change such a critical component of the aircraft, but they needed to obey the Navy. I painted the Japanese insignia, the Hinamaru. I made the paint mask with my cheap circular cutter. I masked and painted the blue stripes on the fuselage and on the vertical stabilizer. The third prototype was flying on the 28th of December 1939 and it fulfilled all the requirements. It achieved 509 km per hour at 4,200 meters altitude. A 3-blade constant speed propeller was used to improve performance and fuel efficiency. The constant speed propeller was a Hamilton design license built by Sumitomo Industries. A 2-blade version was used first, but it was changed to a 3-blade design due to vibration issues. The new 3 blades were adjustable. At high RPM, the propeller pitch is reduced. When cruising, the pitch is increased to reduced RPM. By doing this, the speed can be adjusted without changing RPM. The Profipack kit contains a paint mask for the canopy, but only for the outside, so I made my mask for the inside. I used the outside mask as a template to cut the inside mask. I cut a bit smaller in every dimension because of the thickness of the canopy. On the 11th of March 1940, the second prototype broke apart and crashed in midair during a dive test. The test pilot, Okuyama Masumi, was killed. The investigation team concluded that the plane had crashed due to extreme flutter caused by a broken mass balance in the elevator. If you stick a piece of paper out of a moving car, it will vibrate in the wind. Now that's what flutter is. It twists and shakes out of control. At slow speed it isn't an issue, but it becomes problematic once the plane reaches a certain speed, like speeds over 400 km per hour. The Zero was the first Japanese plane to crash from flutter. The weight and mass balance at the end of the elevator broke off due to stress. Metallurgists at the time were competing to make stronger and lighter alloys. Sumitomo Metal Works had developed an incredibly strong new aluminum alloy mixed with zinc. It had the potential to reduce weight significantly, so it was used in the Zero. Horikoshi decided on extra superduralumin (ESD) as a material for the wing spars. It was strong and lightweight. It helped reduce weight. By the time the Americans were able to use ESD, the war was over. They wanted to use it for the B-29, but it didn't make it in time. It was later used for the B-50 and commercial airliners. Due to the incredible requirements, Nakajima stepped out of the Prototype 12 competition in 1938, claiming it was impossible. It reveals how challenging the Navy's requirements were from the aircraft designer's point of view. Because the aircraft was brand new from the factory, I applied all the stencil details on it. Some of the decals were super tiny, but all in all I had no problem. The carrier film peeled off easily, and the result was very nice. Just like the A5M, Horikoshi emphasized the importance of wind tunnel testing when developing the Zero. Being able to test the plane in the wind tunnel is crucial. The spin tunnel was a different type of test environment. Unlike a standard wind tunnel, in the spin tunnel the air is blown upward from below. In a typical wind tunnel, it is blown horizontally from the front of the aircraft to test aerodynamics. In this case, a massive fan blows air upwards from the floor. Designer could test the Zero in extreme aerodynamic situation. They could simulate a spin or a flat spin. The best way to recover the aircraft from an unwanted spin is to use the rudder. But in flat spin, the elevator blocks airflow smoothly to the rudder, preventing control. Because of that, designers positioned the elevator further back on the tail, right below the rudder. They wanted to avoid bad airflow caused by the elevator from hindering some control. After the test and further calculations, the elevator's position was moved further to the front and placed higher. The spin tunnel was only available late in development, so the first Zeros had a different tail. Thanks to the experience from the spin tunnel, the first mass-produced A6M variants had the modified tail. To achieve high speed, the wings must be as small and thin as possible. However, to improve maneuverability and low-speed handling, the wings have to be large. On the top of that, large and heavy 20mm cannons in the wings were required. The size of the landing gear and cannons determined the wing thickness. For safety, a carrier fighter must have a low landing speed. A small wing, even with flaps, increases the plane's stall speed, making carrier operations dangerous. This has always been the case with carrier aircraft. They must have a large wing area. Of course, that had the added benefit of good maneuverability. Another requirement was space for landing gear and large wing tanks to improve the aircraft's range. The first A6M1 was the first Japanese fighter to have retractable landing gear. The A6M was officially adopted by the Navy on the 24th of July in 1940. Its official name is the Type Zero carrier fighter A6M2 Model 11. Because 1940 was the 2600th anniversary of the Emperor's reign, the plane was named Type Zero after the year's last digit. Until the war's end, over 10,000 A6M Zeros were built, the highest production number in Japanese aviation history. The Zero's first combat mission was on the 19th of August 1940. Captain Yokoyama led 12 A6Ms escorting 54 G3M bombers on the raid 1800 kilometers away. The Chinese had anticipated the arrival of the Japanese and had evacuated their aircraft. A month later, on the 13th of September, 13 A6Ms led by Captain Shindo Suboro discovered Chinese I-15 and I-16 fighters. In the ensuing 10 minutes of battle, 27 Chinese fighters were down, but not a single Zero was lost. As the Zero earned its reputation in China, World War II in Europe had begun. Anticipating conflict with America in the near future, Vice Admiral Yamamoto Isokoru ordered the training of the pilots for extremely long-range missions. Japanese airmen practiced carrier operations incessantly. On the 16th of April 1941, some sources say it was on the 17th of April, another tragedy happened. Carrier Kaga squadron leader Lieutenant Nikaido crashed when his A6M2's wing's surface skin had wrinkled and blown off with the aileron during a routine dive. The next day, Captain Shimokawa Manbei from the Yokosuka Air Group attempted to investigate the crash using another A6M2. During his second dive test, the left aileron and the portion of the main wing's skin were blown off the aircraft. Captain Shimokawa died in the subsequent crash into Tokyo Bay. Because of the A6M development was going so smoothly, the double accidents shocked Hirokoshi's team and the Aviation Bureau. It was revealed that the aileron servo tab was negatively affected the mass balance, which prevented flutter. The intense dive vibrations had ripped the plane apart. Horikoshi's team redesigned this problematic servo tab and changed the production with the modified ailerons and tabs from the 127th aircraft onwards. This change was not installed on earlier models. After the modifications, a never-exceed speed of 667 km per hour was established. On the 31st of August in 1941, all A6M operations in China were temporarily halted. The Zeros participated in approximately 70 missions, and the Zero claimed 100 aerial victories and 160 ground victories. Its deployment crippled the Chinese Air Force. Only 39 Zeros were damaged during the operations in China. Only 2 were destroyed from ground fire, and not a single one was lost in air-to-air combat. It was a pretty impressive combat report. The first 2 completed Zero Prototype 12 was adopted by the Navy as the A6M on the 24th of July 1940. Its official name was Type Zero Carrier Fighter Model 11. The A6M is usually known as the Zero, from its Japanese Navy aircraft type designation, Type Zero Carrier Fighter. In Japan, it was unofficially referred to as Rei-sen, which means Zero-sen. Japanese pilots most commonly called it Zero-sen, where sen is the first part of sentoki, which means fighter plane. In the official designation A6M, the A means a carrier-based fighter. The 6 means that it was the 6th carrier-based fighter model for the Imperial Japanese Navy, and the M indicated that the manufacturer was Mitsubishi. The official Allied codename was Zeke. Allied codes used male names for Japanese fighters, female names for bombers, bird names for gliders, and tree names for trainers. The codename Zeke was assigned by Captain Frank T. McCoy, who wanted a quick and easy-to-remember name. The Allied code for Japanese aircraft was introduced in 1942. Later, 2 other variants of the Zero received their independent codenames. The Nakajima A6M2N floatplane version of the Zero was called Roof, and the A6M332 variant was initially called HEP or Hemp. The third Zero ever produced was the first Model 11. 64 Model 11 were produced at Mitsubishi and were using with a great success in the Imperial Japanese Navy's Chinese campaign groups. The A6M2 Model 11 featured the Sake-21 engine instead of the Suisei 13 engine. From the 67th aircraft onward, folding wingtips and landing hooks were added for carrier operations, and this was the A6M2B Model 21. To differentiate it from the older A6M2, the old fixed wingtips model became A6M2A. Model 11 and Model 21 are both called A6M2, and there is no difference in engine or airframe. The designation of model or type after the A6M2, the first number means the airframe change, and the second number indicates the engine change. So in total, the A6M2 Model 21 means a 6th-generation carrier-based fighter for the Imperial Japanese Navy, produced by Mitsubishi, with the second airframe variation and the first engine variation. Despite its large airframe, the Zero's empty weight was less than 2 tons, around 1700 kilograms. That is incredibly light. An average SUV car nowadays weighs around 2000 kilograms, so the Zero with guns and cannons was lighter than the average SUV. Just for comparison, its main rival, the Hellcat's empty weight was around 4200 kilograms, so more than double the Zero. This light weight was partially thanks to the extra superduralumin ESD used in the main wing spars. ESD was a brand new aluminum alloy developed by Sumitomo Metals. Mixing aluminum with zinc makes it around 35% stronger than regular aluminum. This new alloy was named Super Extra Duralumin, ESD for short. Though it's stronger, ESD needs to be manufactured differently. It cannot be processed with a metal press or bender. Cracks would eventually form during pressing or bending. Because of this, it had to be carefully carved out into the shape of the wing spar. ESD was only suitable for wing spars. Horikoshi carefully applied multiple lightning holes to the structure and thinned the outer skin to under 1 mm. Everything conceivable was done to reduce weight, maximizing the weak engine's potential. The wingspan of the A6M models 11, 21 and 22 was 12 meters. The two wing bars were made out of ESD and had 26 ribs in total. The A6M3 Model 32 and the A6M5 Model 52 had 1 meter shorter wings and had 24 ribs. The A6M5 prioritized speed compared to the A6M2 and thus had shorter wings. Although it was faster, it lost some maneuverability. Because of the shorter wings, the wing load also changed. Cutting the wingtips wasn't really good, increasing power would have been better. Shorter wings means less lift. There needs to be a balance between the performance of the wings, the airframe and the power of the engine. In this case, the A6M2 was a better balanced fighter. The Zero featured the first retractable landing gear system for a Japanese fighter. It was a hydraulically operated retracting mechanism. At the beginning of the combat service, there were problems with the landing gear. High G turning maneuvers could cause the gear to pop out. Engineers had to redesign the locking mechanism. An interesting fact is that the landing gear lever in the cockpit was on the right side. It was completely the opposite of the Western style. After takeoff or before landing, the pilot had to switch hands on the control stick to operate the landing gear lever. Normally, the landing gear lever is around the throttle control, so the pilot continuously holds the control stick and controls the aircraft. The flaps operating lever was also on the right side in the cockpit. That's again unusual. This is another example of how Japanese designers approached many things differently. To prevent blowouts during landing, the tailwheel was made of solid rubber. The Zero is equipped with a radio, however it was commonly accepted as unreliable and useless. Early in the war, famous 64-kill ace squadron leader Sakai Saburo said, "The Zero's radio is useless and the antenna just adds drag." So he cut the antenna off and threw the radio out from the cockpit. Japan had a significant lag in radio technology. Contrary, the Americans had reliable radio and radar technology. Japanese vacuum tubes were low quality, causing bad noise and poor sound quality. Controlling the radio was also unnecessarily complex, leading to a majority of the pilots ignoring them. Japanese pilots had to communicate by their instincts and by using hand signals. To compensate for the weak radio, the Kurushi radio beacon system was used. The lost pilot could follow the beacon signal so they could find their way back to the carrier. But during the war, sending the signal exposed the carrier's position, so many times the carrier turned off the signal to protect the ship from the enemy, but lost homecoming aircraft which couldn't find the way back from the battle. One of the Zero's greatest traits was its handling characteristics. Regardless of speed, the flight stick sensitivity remained the same. When the first prototype was tested, pilots complained of the controls stiffening at high speed and the far too sensitive elevator. The prototype's controls were sensitive, making maneuvers and aerobatics easy, but it was too sensitive at high speed. To solve this problem and reduce workload from the pilot, a gearbox system was installed in the flight control. However, this system was too complex and increased weight, so Horikoshi found an easy and cheap solution. They made the control cables thinner and took advantage of its stretching. At low speeds, the airflow pressure on the elevator control surface is low, meaning the flight controls are responding naturally. At high speed, airflow pressure increases, making the elevator heavy to operate. If the pilot pulled out at high speed, the cables would stretch and reduce pitch sensitivity so that they would stay constant. Arguably, the Zero was a very easy and pleasant to fly aircraft. The Zero was excellent in dogfight. Allied pilots knew it and always tried to dodge a dogfight with the Zero. Now let me tell you the story of the Zero that I built. I read the story first of the 124 and later I was so happy when I saw that Eduard released the 124 in a Profipack kit. The aircraft was built by Mitsubishi on the 4th of October 1941 and at the factory it was painted an overall grey-green color with a black cowling. The aircraft was delivered to the Imperial Japanese Navy as a Type 0 A6M2 Model 21 fighter. The manufacturer number was 5349. The 5349 was assigned to the Hiryu aircraft carrier. It received a tail code B2-124 with a blue horizontal stripe above the code and two blue vertical stripes on the rear fuselage. This aircraft didn't have a long combat history, only 4 months of fighting after it left Mitsubishi's factory. On the 7th of December, during the attack against Pearl Harbor, this was one of the Zeros from the Hiryu carrier. 2 months later, on the 19th of February 1942, took off from Hiryu under the control of Jaime Toyoshima as one of the 36 Zeros on the raid against the Harbin. The air formation included other A6M2 Zeros and Day-3A Walls and B-5N Kates from Kaga and Akagi and other aircraft carriers. This was the last mission for the 124 because while making a low pass over Darwin Harbor, the aircraft was hit by a .303 caliber bullet in the oil tank and began losing oil pressure. The pilot force landed the damaged Zero on Melville Island. The pilot belly landed the Zero. It sustained damage to the leading edge of the wing from vegetation. The propeller broke off and the engine became dislodged from its mount. The rear fuselage showed ripples due to the strain of the landing. When the pilot abandoned the aircraft, the cockpit canopy was left open. During the landing, the pilot, Toyoshima, suffered facial injuries from the gun sight, but basically he survived the accident with no serious injuries. Basically, this was the end of the 124. However, the story of the pilot is also interesting. After the accident, Toyoshima wandered away from the crashed aircraft. Later, he was disarmed and captured by Aboriginal Matthias Ulungura. He took his pistol and escorted him to Bathurst Island. On the 24th of February 1942, he was handed over to Sergeant Leslie J. Power of the 23rd Field Company Royal Australian Engineers. On the 27th of February, Toyoshima and Power were photographed together, and Toyoshima's face was bandaged. Afterwards, Toyoshima was taken to Darwin. During his initial interrogation, he gave false identity to the Australians. He said his name was Tadao Minami, he was born on the 20th of March 1919 in Kanagawa, Ken, and he was a farmer. He said he was an aerial gunner from a bomber, and he bailed out and swam ashore. He hoped to discourage the Australians from searching for his Zero. The Aussies didn't believe in his tale because his flight suit had an ideograph for Hiryu and was not stained with sea salt. Later, his Zero and parachute were also found. During one of his interrogations, Toyoshima's Shaninbari was taken from him by an intelligence officer. A Shaninbari, or 1000 stitch, is a belt or strip of cloth stitched 1000 times and given as an amulet by Japanese women to a soldier going away to war. It was typically 15 centimeters wide and around a meter in length. Usually the soldier fastened it around its waist. He became the first Japanese prisoner of war captured in Australia. Initially, he was assigned prisoner number PWJ 910.1, which later became PWJ-A 110001. During the following month, he was transported to different prison camps. Finally, on the 8th of January 1943, he was transported to Cowra POW camp. By early 1944, there were 1100 Japanese prisoners imprisoned, larger than the capacity of the camp or the guards. On the 5th of August 1944 at 2 a.m. inside the Cowra POW camp, Toyoshima signaled the start of the Cowra Breakout with a bugle, and hundreds of Japanese prisoners rushed to the perimeter fence. The Australians opened fire and killed roughly 100 rioters with gunfire before they reached the gate. During the riot, Toyoshima managed to reach a stormwater drain ditch just outside the fence, but he was shot in the chest, mortally wounded. He lit a cigarette, then he committed suicide, cut his own throat. His body was found the next morning. The Cowra Breakout was the largest attempted prison break in history. A total of 231 Japanese prisoners died, many from self-inflicted wounds. More than 100 others were wounded, 4 guards died and 4 others wounded during the riot. I built a very simple round-shaped base under the Zero. I like it when the base is a bit smaller than the model, thus it doesn't take the attention of the aircraft. I glued thin 6mm popsicle sticks and applied a very simple paint job, white and red. At the end I added a bit of weathering. The wreckage of the 124 is on display at the Darwin Aviation Museum. The Zero is on a small platform with its Sake radial engine and 2 propeller blades. A piece of the wing and the profile drawing view of the Zero is behind the wreckage hanging on the wall. Also, there is a massive print of the original photograph of the crash site. The Australian War Memorial also has 3 items in its collection. On public display is the bugle used by Toyoshima to signal the start of the Cowra Breakout. In their collection, but not on public display, is his Shaninbari, the 1000 stitch belt, donated by the family of the intelligence officer who took it from Toyoshima. Also not on public display is one of the Zero's data plates. The Royal Australian Air Force Museum at Point Cook has 2 items related to the pilot Toyoshima on public display, including his Japanese flag and his flight suit. Throughout the years there were many other variants and sub-variants of the Zero. I would like to mention 3 of them. To improve the high-altitude characteristics of the Zero, the aircraft was equipped with the Nakajima Sake-21 engine with a 2-stage supercharger. The new version was the A6M2 Model 32. The aircraft was fitted with a large propeller and propeller cone. The wingspan was reduced by a meter and the wingtips were chopped and given a new square shape. This variant didn't bring the expected results. The consumption of the new engine and reduction in fuel storage capacity significantly shortened the aircraft's range. Though the engine was stronger, pilots didn't like this version. Most of the manufactured aircraft were used for pilot training. By mid-1944, one of the major problems of the Japanese Navy was the shortage of the trained pilots. The Navy wanted to speed up the training of the pilots, and because of this, A6M2 Model 11 and later the A6M5 Model 52 was converted into a 2-seat trainer. The Navy officially adopted the first trainer aircraft in March 1944. The airframe of the Model 11 and Model 52 was used for this development. The cockpit was simply doubled. The antenna mast was placed between the 2 seats. The tailwheel was fixed and fitted with a larger wheel. Its armament was reduced to 2 20mm Type 99 machine guns. It was not equipped with the folding wingtips either. The training version was produced until the end of the war, and these aircraft were used by training units in Japan. The Navy tasked Nakajima, which at the time was producing the majority of the Zeros, to convert the A6M2 Model 11 into a float plane. This was the A6M2N. The entire landing gear was removed. The central wing was mounted on a large main float under the fuselage, and 2 auxiliary floats were slung from the wings. The tailwheel and the landing hook were removed. The rudder was extended to increase stability, and 2 other vertical fins were added. In terms of characteristics, due to its greater weight and air resistance, obviously it wasn't as good as the A6M2 Model 11, but it showed impressive performance. It was used by units fighting on small islands in the South and the North Seas. Most of its missions were escorting bombers and warships and attacking ground targets. 327 roofs were built by Nakajima up to the end of the war. This build took me a few months, but I really enjoyed it. The kit is just fantastic, and the excellent Eduard engineering made this kit enjoyable. Do you like big projects like this? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. If you enjoyed this long project or find these videos useful, please hit the like and subscribe with the little bell, and you won't miss any of the upcoming videos. Your support means a lot to me and keeps my motivation high. Also, feel free to share your opinions in the comment section. I hope you had a good time, keep modeling, and I see you in the next project.